Hi and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. I'm going to tell you a story about sainthood and how the brightest halos can cast the darkest shadows. When our world was shattered by a single, terrifying medical diagnosis, I watched my wife transform. She didn't just become a caregiver, she became a force of nature, a hero. She took our private, unspeakable pain and forged it into a public beacon of hope, a charity that bore our son's name and her beautiful, compassionate face. For years, I lived in the warm, humbling glow of her goodness, my life reduced to the simple, sacred purpose of caring for our child while she saved the world. I was the quiet man behind the saint, and I worshiped the ground she walked on. This story is about the day I stumbled into the back office of her church and found the secret ledgers. It's about the discovery that my wife's beautiful, celebrated charity was not a mission of mercy. It was a business. And our son's illness wasn't just a tragedy to be endured. It was the single greatest asset in a portfolio of lies so vast and so cruel that it didn't just break my heart. It unmade my soul. Our life before the diagnosis was a quiet masterpiece of suburban contentment. We were a team, a partnership so seamless it felt like a single, breathing entity. We had a home filled with laughter, a marriage built on a foundation of 15 years of shared history, and a son who was the sun, the moon, and all the stars in our shared universe. He was the center of our world, the reason for everything. The day the doctors gave us the name of his illness, a rare, degenerative genetic disorder, was the day that world ended. The words they used were a cold, clinical storm that leveled everything. Incurable, progressive, lifelong care. The ground gave way beneath my feet and I fell into a black, bottomless well of grief and fear. I thought it would break us. I thought it would break her. I was wrong. After the initial shattering shock, she did not break. She was forged. The grief that had hollowed me out seemed to fill her with a fierce, terrifying purpose. She became a warrior. She learned the arcane language of medicine. She challenged doctors. She navigated the labyrinthine hell of the insurance industry. And then she had the idea that would come to define our lives. She decided she would not just fight for our son, she would fight for all the children like him. That was the birth of the foundation. It started small, a simple website, a local bake sale. But her passion, her story, our story, was a powerful, irresistible force. She was a natural. She could stand in front of a room of jaded, wealthy strangers, and with her voice trembling with a genuine, heartbreaking sincerity, she could make them weep. She could make them believe. She could make them open their wallets. The foundation exploded. It became a phenomenon, a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Our family's private tragedy became a public crusade, and she was its beautiful, tragic, and universally adored general. I, in the meantime, had retreated from the world. My life had shrunk to the four walls of our home, to the relentless, all-consuming rhythm of our son's care. I quit my job. My world became a universe of medication schedules, physical therapy, and the quiet, desperate work of trying to bring a flicker of joy into the eyes of a child who was in constant pain. I watched her success from a distance with a sense of profound, reverent awe. She was the hero. She was the one making a difference, the one building a legacy of hope from the ashes of our pain. I was just a caregiver, the quiet, unseen man in the background. I felt a deep and abiding guilt for my own smallness, my own inability to do more. My trust in her was absolute. She handled everything, the foundation, the finances, our life. I was too overwhelmed, too exhausted, too consumed by my own grief and the daily realities of our son's illness to even think about it. She was my angel, my saint, and I was her humble, grateful servant. I had no idea that her beautiful, celebrated mission was a carefully constructed lie, and our son's suffering was not her cause, it was her product. The foundation was not a part of our life, it became our entire life. Our home was its unofficial headquarters. The phone rang at all hours. Volunteers and staff members were a constant presence. I, in my quiet background role, became a familiar, if peripheral, figure to them all, the saint's devoted, sad-eyed husband. I saw the way they looked at her with a worshipful reverence that mirrored my own. She was a force of nature, a whirlwind of compassion and competence. She would fly across the country for fundraising galas, she would meet with politicians, she would appear on television, her beautiful face a mask of graceful, determined sorrow. She was the perfect, tragic hero, and the world loved her for it. I was so proud. But as the years went on, and the foundation grew from a passion project into a massive, corporate-style nonprofit, I began to notice a subtle shift in her. The passionate, grief-stricken mother was slowly being replaced by a sharp, focused CEO. Her conversations became less about the children we were helping and more about quarterly fundraising goals, donor acquisition strategies, and brand management. I told myself it was a necessary evolution. To do good on this scale, you had to be a professional. You had to be tough. She was simply adapting to the demands of the world she now inhabited. I was the one who was naive, the one who didn't understand the realities of this new, powerful world. The first time a real, undeniable crack appeared in the edifice of my belief, it was because of a simple, stupid mistake. Her mistake. She had left her personal laptop open on the kitchen counter, open to an email she had been in the middle of writing. I was just walking by and my eyes caught a single jarring phrase. The email was to the chairman of our board and she was talking about a new capital campaign. The phrase that stopped me cold was this: "We need to leverage the boy's next health crisis for maximum emotional impact." The boy, not our son, the boy, and leverage his health crisis. The words were so cold, so clinical, so utterly alien coming from the woman I knew that my mind couldn't process them. It felt like a punch to the gut. I stood there frozen until I heard her coming back into the room. I moved away from the laptop, my heart hammering against my ribs. She saw my face and she must have seen the shock, the confusion. She glanced at the screen and for a fleeting, almost imperceptible moment, I saw a flicker of pure, cold panic in her eyes. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a look of profound, weary sadness. She came to me and took my hands. Her hands were cold. "You saw that," she said, her voice a low, heartbroken whisper. It was not a question. "I know how it sounds," she continued, her eyes filling with tears. "It sounds monstrous. It's the part of this job I hate, the part that is killing my soul. But this is the world we live in, my love. To get these people, these cold, rich, jaded people to care, you have to speak their language. You have to think like them. You have to turn our pain into a marketing strategy. It makes me sick to my stomach to even write those words, but if it means we can save one more child, then it's a compromise I have to make." Her performance was flawless. The tears, the self-loathing, the appeal to the greater good, it was a perfect, unassailable defense. And she was right. I was naive. I didn't understand this world. I was the simple caregiver and she was the one in the trenches, making the ugly, necessary compromises. I felt a wave of shame for my own judgment, for my own simplistic view of the world. I held her and I comforted her. I apologized for my own small-mindedness, and I pushed the ugly, clinical phrase deep down into the recesses of my mind, another sacrifice to be laid on the altar of her magnificent, difficult work. I tried to forget the email. I tried to bury it under the daily, relentless weight of our life. But it was a splinter lodged deep in my mind, and it began to fester. I found myself listening more closely, watching more carefully. I was a man who had been living in a state of willful blindness, and my eyes were beginning, painfully, to adjust to the light. I started to notice the discrepancies, the small, jarring notes in the beautiful symphony of her public persona. There was the lifestyle. On paper, we lived modestly. She took a small, respectable salary from the foundation, and I had no income at all. Yet she wore designer clothes, always explained away as donations for her public appearances. She took first-class flights, justified as a necessity for her demanding schedule. We had a new car, a luxury SUV, a loan from a generous board member. Every luxury had a plausible, charitable explanation. But taken together, they painted a picture of a life that was far removed from the one we were supposedly living. Then there was the secrecy. Her office at home became a fortress. The door was always locked. Financial documents were never left out. When I asked her once about the foundation's detailed budget, she had given me a sad, pitying smile. "My love," she had said, her voice full of a gentle condescension, "your heart is the purest thing in the world. Let me protect it from the ugliness of the numbers. You just focus on what matters, on him." She had made my ignorance a virtue, a holy state that she was tasked with protecting. My investigation began not as a conscious decision, but as a series of small, furtive acts of rebellion against my own enforced ignorance. It started with the trash. I began, in the dead of night, to go through the bags from her office before I took them to the curb. I felt like a ghoul, a thief in my own home, but what I found was more damning than I could have imagined. I found shredded documents, which I painstakingly, obsessively, pieced back together on the floor of the garage. And I began to see the real numbers. I found credit card statements, for cards I didn't know she had, filled with charges for five-star hotels, for jewelry, for things that could not be explained away as a business expense. I found drafts of contracts with consultants, companies I had never heard of, for amounts that were astronomical, and I found the first faint traces of the real financial structure. The foundation was just the top layer, the clean, public-facing entity. Beneath it was a complex web of for-profit LLCs, management companies, and consulting firms, all owned, through a series of legal firewalls, by her. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that unlocked the entire horrifying truth, came from a place she had never thought I would look: our son's medical records. I had become the expert on his condition, and I had a login to his online patient portal to manage his appointments and prescriptions. One day I was looking through his file, and I saw a series of invoices from a specialty medical supply company. The bills were enormous, for experimental drugs and equipment, all paid for, the record showed, by our foundation. But I knew for a fact that he had never received these treatments. I had been by his side every single day. I managed his every medication, his every procedure. These were phantom treatments, phantom supplies. I called the supply company, my heart a cold, dead weight in my chest. I gave them the invoice numbers. I asked for the shipping addresses. And the woman on the other end of the line gave me an address not for our home, not for a hospital, but for a private, climate-controlled storage facility on the other side of the state. It was then that I finally understood. The foundation was not just a vehicle for her to live a lavish lifestyle. It was a machine for generating fake expenses. She was using our son's real, tragic illness to create a mountain of fraudulent medical bills, which the foundation would then pay to her own secret companies, disguising the theft as legitimate charitable spending. She was not just stealing from the donors. She was stealing from him. She was using his pain, his suffering, the very name of his disease, as the primary raw material for her own enrichment. The saint was not just a sinner. She was a ghoul, feasting on the tragedy of her own child. The drive to the storage facility was a silent, cold journey into the heart of the abyss. I was not just a husband who had been betrayed. I was a man on the verge of discovering a truth so monstrous it threatened to extinguish the very light of the world. I gained access to the facility by a simple, brutal lie. I told the manager I was from the foundation, here to pick up a donation. I used her name, the name that opened every door. He didn't even question it. The unit was registered to one of her shell corporations. He led me to the back, to a large, climate-controlled unit, and he opened the door for me. It was not filled with medical supplies. It was a museum of her greed. It was filled with art, with antique furniture, with boxes of designer clothes and handbags, with cases of fine wine. It was a dragon's hoard, a secret, hidden world of luxury and wealth, bought with the money that was supposed to be saving children's lives. And in the back of the unit, on a small, makeshift desk, was a laptop. It was her real office, the secret brain of her entire operation. The password was the name of our son. The computer was a perfect, self-contained universe of her crime. It had everything. The real set of books, the ones that showed the millions of dollars being funneled from the foundation into her offshore accounts. The email correspondence with her co-conspirators, a small, loyal team of employees from the foundation who were in on the scheme. The detailed plans for her future, a future that did not include me or our son. It was all there. A new life, a new identity, a villa in Tuscany. She was going to wait until our son's inevitable decline reached its final stage. And then, after a suitable period of public mourning, the grieving, heroic mother was going to disappear, to retire from the public eye to live a quiet life of unimaginable wealth, a life paid for by the suffering of her own child. The betrayal was so perfect, so complete, that it was almost a work of art. It was a masterpiece of pure, unadulterated evil. I took the laptop. I walked out of that storage facility, out of that tomb of her greed, and I knew that my life, the life of the quiet, trusting, loving husband, was over. The confrontation was not a confrontation at all. It was an execution. I went home and I waited for her. When she walked in, fresh from a charity luncheon where she had no doubt moved a room to tears, I was sitting in the living room. The laptop was on the coffee table in front of me, open to a spreadsheet that showed the flow of millions of dollars from a children's charity into an account in the Cayman Islands. She saw the laptop. She saw my face. And the actress, for the first time in a decade, forgot her lines. The mask of the saint did not just crack, it shattered into 1,000 pieces. And the creature underneath was a thing of pure, cold, reptilian fury. "You," she whispered, her voice a sound I had never heard before, a low, guttural hiss of pure hatred. "You were never supposed to look. I was never supposed to be anything more than a prop, was I said, my own voice a dead, calm thing that surprised me. "The sad, grieving husband, the perfect, tragic backdrop for your performance." She didn't deny it. She didn't try to justify it. She simply stared at me, her mind, I could see, already calculating the new variables, the new threats, the new strategies. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice the cold, hard negotiation of a CEO in a hostile takeover. "My son," I said, "and my soul. You can have the money. You can have the life you've built on the bones of our family. I don't want it. I want out. I want to take him and I want to disappear and I want you to let us go." It was a deal with the devil, a pact of mutual assured destruction. I had the evidence to send her to prison for the rest of her life. She had the power and the money to drag me and my son through a public hell that would destroy what little peace we had left. We were two scorpions in a bottle, and so we made a deal. I walked away. I took our son and I took a small, untraceable settlement, enough to provide for his care for the rest of his life. And I vanished. I moved to a small, quiet town where no one knew our names, where the story of the heroic mother and her tragic child had never been told. She, I assume, continued her performance, a grieving mother who had lost her husband to the unbearable strain of their tragedy. The foundation, I am sure, continues to thrive. My new life is small. It is quiet, and it is relentlessly, painfully real. My life is no longer a public spectacle of hope. It is a private, daily act of love and care. I am not the husband of a saint. I am just a father. And in the quiet, profound, and sometimes heartbreaking reality of that simple, honest role, I have finally, after a lifetime of lies, found my own, small and genuine salvation. Thank you for tuning in to Reddit Whispers. We've all faced moments when everything felt broken. What was your turning point? Leave it in the comments because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now.